There you go. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight for our November TIOS. I'm Alexis Truitt, the Executive Director of the American Alliance for Theater and Education, and I am super excited to have Quenna Lené Barrett with us to talk about some of her work and in particular SEL. So without further ado, Quenna, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexis. Hi, friends. It's so good to be here with you all and to share a little bit about my practice and how I sort of incorporate SEL into some of my devising work with young folks. So I'm Quenna Lené Barrett, using she and her pronouns. I will share a bit of a PowerPoint and then after that, mostly hoping for some discussion, and we might do some small group breakouts, and maybe we'll sort of just stay here. But I'd love to hear or read from you all. So if you would like to share with your voice, please do, or if you want to type it in the chat. But would love to sort of hear a bit about sort of where you're coming from and why you said yes to tonight's presentation or gathering. So, you know, if there's a specific thing you were interested in or curious about, or if you just love to come to these and you're like, go AATE, which is also great because we all should be. So yeah, I'll open it up if anybody wants to share verbally or via the chat. Yeah, Krista.
I'll share verbally. I'm tired of typing today. I teach at the Visual and Performing Arts Academy at Salem High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I'm very passionate about SEL. It's been incorporated into our school quite a bit over the past several years. And I teach a class where second semester, it's all devising. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks, Krista. For any of you who just joined, I'm inviting folks to share verbally or via the chat, sort of a bit about your orientation to this work, where you're coming from, and why you said yes to this evening.
Hello, my name is Joy. I'm joining from Boise, Idaho today. I studied educational theater, but I still quite didn't find what I am headed with my theology background as an education pastor. So I am really enjoying these series at AAT. Thank you so much for these opportunities, and I'm excited for this conversation today. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Toby has shared in the chat that he is with the Department of Theater and Dance at Agnes Scott College. Professor said yes to this because he works in schools often, and SEL is something folks talk about a lot, though not in the context of drama and theater. So interested to know more.
I can go. Hi, everyone. I'm Helen. I'm seeing some people I know. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Krista. Hi, Toby. Nice to meet you. I run the Cat Youth Theatre here in New York City at CUNY, and I also teach on the MA in Applied Theatre. So I do loads of play building and devising, and I'm just always really curious and interested to learn more about how other people do it. So I'm really interested to find out what your take is on it.
Greetings all, I'm Jonathan Jones, and I'm, I work at NYU Steinhardt for sure, and for CUNY as well at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, and I'm on the board of AATE, and I'm formerly Quenna's academic advisor and instructor for some of her classes, and big fan of all of your work, Quenna, obviously, and I too have engaged in a bunch of different devised projects, and I'm super interested in hearing more about your work whenever I can.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I'll read this from the chat. And then if folks want to keep adding to the chat, feel free to continue to chat throughout the evening, but then I'll sort of jump into the presentation. So we've got Bethany, a graduate student in theater for young audiences at University of Central Florida in Orlando. Oh no, hurricane. We're glad you could make it. Weather, what a thing. Interested in incorporating SEL throughout the rehearsal process and working with you to create an experience that everyone can feel ownership of. And I love devising to make work relevant and personal. Yes. resonates a lot with me, as I think you'll see as I jump into these slides. So I'm gonna do that. Okay. So first of all, I would like to say I am not an SEL expert. I do a lot of devising. SEL, I recently was invited to work on a curriculum, a project called Once Upon Our Time Capsule in Chicago that was looking to, they created this book from stories from children throughout the pandemic. And so they wanted to put SEL into that curriculum. And I was like, I approached, and throughout the interview process, I was pretty frank with them, like, this isn't necessarily what I do, but I do think that the tools that I use working with youth in theater can be quite applicable. And I know how to use the internet. I know how to do some research. So I can look to see, you know, sort of what SEL is and how it fits within the frameworks that I already use, and sort of how to support you in this project. So I was lucky that they said yes, they wanted to go on a journey with me. And it was a learning experience for me. And sort of even further throughout that process, I realized, oh, I do already, you know, quite sort of intentionally, unintentionally do incorporate a lot of the social emotional learning components in the work that I do with devising. And so in a little bit, I'll sort of share how I think about it within the frameworks that I already use. They just want to say that. And then I see Danae, I think, zooming in from Cambridge, graduate student, Harvard's Grad School of Education. I have a friend who's an alum of that. Oh, you're having issues with the slides. SEL is a huge interest of mine, especially documenting SEL development. Great, thank you. And another PhD student who studies learning in theater. Wonderful. So you cannot see it at all. What do you see?
We see, oh, now it's better. There was a sort of, half of it was hidden, but it's getting better. That bit there, there's a sort of, yep, it's going more.
I'm not doing anything. So I don't know
Gray
what
column.
I think it is. It that is it the chat
Yeah, it's
box?
gone now. It's gone now.
It's the chat box. Okay, I won't look at the chat. I'll put it somewhere else. We love Zoom. It's fun. Can you? Is it now? Is it still a problem?
It just came
It came
back.
back.
Okay.
Oh,
Now
it's
it's on again.
Okay, I gotcha. Thank you, tech support. Okay. So just show a couple photos while I talk a bit about my orientation to devising. So I started a program called the Community Actors Program, and most of the frameworks that we'll look at come from that work. When I was at the University of Chicago, a space called the Arts Incubator, which is off campus in a neighborhood called Washington Park. I should also say I am from Chicago. I live in Chicago. I practice here. Currently, I am the Associate Director of Education and Engagement at Goodman, and I teach at Columbia University, new this year, or Columbia College Chicago, as well as DePaul University at the Theater School. And so I began this program called the Community Actors Program, sort of fresh out of my master's in applied theater. I was really interested as a person from this neighborhood, from Washington Park, in using the tools of theater to tell our own stories. And so I was lucky enough that I got a teaching artist position, which turned into a full-time position, where I was able to create this program for high school students, where we navigated issues that impacted their real lives. We were using the tools specifically of Theater Be Oppressed to build and share performances that invited the audience to consider, right, sort of what all of our roles were in upholding systems that keep the issues present that they were looking at. I did another program called the Intergenerational Theater of the Oppressed Project, which was a similar approach, but was designed specifically to help break down barriers across age boundaries. So that was our youngest participants in that program were 9, and our oldest were 77, I think. And so really sort of this wide range, wide spectrum of age and experience in that program. But we devised scenes around mental health, and we were able to we did forum theater with those scenes. At my space currently at the Goodman, I run a program, a few programs, but the ones that are in devising, there's a program called Strike, which is more explicitly about political-based theater. And so they're learning other tools, not just Theater of the Oppressed, but how to sort of tell a story to get a very direct and specific political point across. And I generally teach in a program there called Playbuild program, where it's an entry level to theater performance, and they are devising. So it's students from all across the city who have access to that program. And then I've done some devising with adults as well. And so there's a theater company in Chicago called For Youth Inquiry, and it's housed within the Illinois Office of Adolescent Health. And so we do a lot of work around the sexual health rights and well-being of young folks. And so with them, I started performing in these plays in schools to teach sex ed. And then as a company, we got really curious about, well, how do we engage adult allies in these conversations as well? And so we started devising shows around issues that you face, but sort of for adults. And so through that, I helped to devise a play called First, which was about the myth of virginity. And then a play more recently called This Boat Called My Body, which was about the issues that young folks face navigating access to abortion care. And then again, currently at DePaul Theater School and Columbia College, directing and teaching devising to undergrads and MFAs. So a lot of entry points to this work. The photos that you've seen are all, these currently are from the intergenerational theater program, and the others were from the community actors program, and that was all at the University of Chicago. So in preparing for this discussion tonight, I went and I looked at the COSEL website again, which again was very useful to me in that curriculum building. And you know, as I was looking, this sort of image on the left, or the text, it's taken from the classroom section, right? And so it asks you to consider these questions to see if you're integrating this across your classroom. And now this isn't theater specific, right? But sort of looking at this, immediately my mind goes to, well, at least this is how I experience a theater or devising classroom, right? In all of the programs that I mentioned, right? Students are regularly sharing their perspectives on how the issues that we're talking about sort of connect to what they're learning. It is a specific focus on co-constructing knowledge, right? I'm bringing things to the table, as are they, and so I'll show in just a second what that looks like. And there's a lot of reflection and discussion, right? And so do teachers use institutional strategies to foster student ownership over their learning? We'll see that as well. That those for me are all sort of core to the way that I think about devising. And again, like I wasn't intentionally calling it SEL, but I went back through and this is what I'm doing. This is core to my approach. And so now, like, the question is, okay, how do I talk about that with my students, right? And sort of make sure that they are on that journey as well, as that is a core component of the SEL. So this is the definitions, right? If I look at this, if you can, on the website, the COSEL website, which is just cosel.org, the circle graph, it's interactive, and you'll get sort of how they define those core competencies, right? And so this definitions are how they are describing these competencies of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. And then I've included how I connected them in that Once Upon a Time capsule curriculum project that I worked on. Again, that wasn't theater related, but it was about storytelling, right? At the end of that curriculum, students have created a book together. And so throughout, we had to weave all of these opportunities for them to talk about their own stories, right? To be able to share that, to be able to communicate that with their peers, and then really work together to create this collaborative project. As reflecting in my process of devising, I chose 3 elements that are core to that work, which are trust and community building, transfer of ownership, and reflection, which happens in a lot of ways and all throughout the So for me, trust and community building looks like playing games. Again, I love the Theater of the Oppressed arsenal of games and exercises. And even if the project isn't a Theater of the Oppressed project, I return to those games, right? I'm using a lot of that for community building. We're also making sure that we're establishing agreements at the beginning of any process, and as well including measures for accountability, which I think often gets missed as a part of that work, right? So we create these agreements and sometimes we return to them, sometimes we don't, but how at the beginning as a community can we say, this is how I would like to hold each other to that standard, right? And if someone doesn't meet it, what do we do then, right? So how can we sort of create that space even at the beginning of our process? As well as ritual, right? So that looks like our check-ins and our check-outs. We do that at every rehearsal, every meeting. I'll sort of share my outline for the day. Like the way that I schedule the day also becomes a ritual, right? So that students know what to expect. Transfer of ownership, I think, is something that it can be tricky, but when intentional, I think it not only makes the process stronger, right, but helps to sort of really engender the youth leadership. So throughout our process, usually about halfway, we do a project management session, and this often occurs when I'm working with teams, even with sort of at the college level as well. I'll give them a sort of assignment where they have to create the proposal and the timeline for their final project. And from that point on, they kind of lead the process, right? And so I let them know early on that this is where we're headed, this is where we're going, so that it's not a surprise. So then they are leading the warm-up activities, they are leading the check-ins, they're leading the reflections, and right, we've built in skills for them to be able to give each other input and kind of to direct each other. I resisted calling myself a director for a long time because in my early work with teams, like I wasn't directing, you know, I felt like I really was supporting them to be able to direct themselves and each other. And then reflection. So again, our check-ins, our check-outs, right? Roses and thorns, or whatever other framework you want to use, deltas and challenges, right? Creating those moments where we can check in about our process. I use a lot in my work the critical response feedback process from Liz Lerman, right? And so teaching that to teams so that they learn how to give critical feedback to each other without imbuing everything with their own opinions, right? Like focusing on the artist, on the creator. And then there are, of course, the formal pre and post surveys, but also like informal ways to sort of check in throughout the process. Simply just asking how it's going, right? And creating those moments for pause and processing. So I've gone through a few of my sort of frameworks or curriculum and have tracked how I see SEL right across those elements and have color coded it that way. And so for the grading, for trust and community building, self-awareness, social awareness, and relationship skills. For that transfer of ownership, we'll see self-management and responsible decision-making. And for any of the reflection components, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. It wasn't always very clean, right? Sometimes these elements overlap, and sometimes we're working on transfer of ownership and reflection at the same time. And so I kind of just chose a bucket. But to say, you know, sometimes we're working on several of those competencies at once. So this is an example of a summer session for that community actors program, right? And what the outline of the summer looks like at a high level. So this is more or less what we did in the summer of 2017. And so I've tried to just, again, highlight some of the key ways in which you'll see those competencies showing up, right? So at the very beginning, the focus really is on community building. It's on making sure that we're building trust within the community to be able to trust each other with our stories, particularly when we're telling, creating shows that are rooted in our lived experience. I also want to point out in the column to the very left, you'll see that how I'm sort of organizing each week. And I want to call that out from my professor, Brent Blair from University of Southern California, that this language I borrowed from him in terms of like how to build out a Theater of the Oppressed project. And so even when it's not that, that still informs how I think about structuring a 6 to 8 week program, right? So again, it's really about ensemble building at the beginning, community building. We move then into sort of the technical training with community actors program. A lot of those students had not acted before. Some of them had, but not all of them did, right? And so I was interested in not just a TO program, but how do we actually give them the skills of performance, right? So that they feel really equipped when they get to the point of sharing their short play that they created. When we get into week 3, that you'll see that project management workshop there, right? They have the final piece proposal, so they need to not only know what the story is, but like how do you communicate that to an audience, right? As a teacher now at the university level, I use a very similar exercise with my students to help them prepare for the real world, right? And so I'm taking language that I get from grant applications and put that into their project proposals. And I've had at least one student who, since we've done that, has said, thank you for this. You know, I applied for a grant and I got it because we had that practice of doing this in our class. As we get to the latter end of the summer, right, we are rehearsing. When we go and see other people's work, right, how do we make sure that we create opportunities to debrief and talk about that, right? How does that inform our process? And so that becomes a part of our editing and our reflection. And then once we've shared, right, making sure that there's an opportunity to reflect after that. This would be sort of how I break down a day. And so, you know, I've got all my general lesson planning stuff at the top here that will sort of carry on throughout that week. But in the course of the day, right, the flow of the day, if there's a check-in, there's an opening activity, there's always a sort of a warm-up or an ensemble builder, even as we get deeper into the process, right, we don't use that part of our ritual. Then there's whatever the focus area for that day is, whatever skills learning, and we debrief and we check out, right? And again, sort of you can track how those social emotional competencies are coming across. I'm just now seeing this note in a chat about having a lot of background noise. Is anybody else having trouble, difficulty hearing? So sorry.
We have the transcript down now too, so I think this helps a little bit, but yes.
Okay. I probably should also slow down in the chat because it got in the way of the box. We'll go back and, you know, sort of pause for questions, and then I can help to clarify if anything got lost. So I wanted to, I think, share a quick video of students reflecting on the community actors process. So I'll mute myself, and then hopefully you'll be able to hear the video without my ambient.
started the Community Actors Program 4 years ago, so this is our 4th year running it. I think a lot of times we hear a very particular narrative about, you know, Black teens or teens from the south side of Chicago, and a lot of times those teens don't get to tell their story themselves.
In the real world, in our community at least, laughter is not really something that goes on a lot. We kind of experience pain, hurt, suffering. So in this play, we talked about teen pregnancy and bullying because it's something that we could relate to. It's something that we see every day.
Steven had told me you was pregnant.
Okay.
What you mean, okay? You know we had the little hookup that one time?
The little one-time thing, and I was pregnant before that.
It only takes one time for somebody to get pregnant.
I was pregnant before we had our one time.
Listen, man, I need to know if this is my baby or not.
This baby is not yours. It's easy.
Are you sure?
Yes.
I like that it brings like different parts of the community together, and we discussing like this will happen to my community, this will happen to my community.
Like where I come from is like all bunch of violence. Like I was going to school trying to get extra credit, trying to graduate early. Yeah, CAP. Yeah, that's a really good place. Like it helped me focus.
I joined the CAP program because my parents think that I'm a really good actor. I think what I learned from this program that is I actually am very talented at acting. It's something that I could really pursue as a career.
Youth are already eager, especially our youth. Like they have so many stories. They have, you know, so much to say. And it is as simple as offering a space, saying, you know, I'm here. Also, don't think that the goal is to make actors necessarily, but that they have these skills and that they have this introductory experience. But hopefully they're taking the other parts of the tools and using that in their lives daily.
I've lost the video window and now it's like just playing in my head. So give me a second. Okay, hopefully you did not hear that additional video play. My apologies for that. I stopped the share before I closed the window. Okay, so even in that reflection, right, for me, it's clear how focusing on the issues that they're navigating allowed students a space to name and reflect, right, a couple of things, which again track to those core competencies. How does this impact me, right? How does this issue impact me? Self-awareness. How does this impact my community? Social awareness. When I encounter this situation again, how can I make a different choice, right? Self-management and responsible decision-making. And how might I become an ally to others facing similar situations, so relationship skills. I think that's about what I had on the slide. I was just going to share one more image of some memes that students created, but maybe I'll find that later and come back to it. So I wanted to pause in case there were questions. I know it was a little difficult to hear. So if anybody wants me to go back or has questions to clarify anything, I'm going to pause for that.
I do have a question, but it might be something that you that could be answered later on. So if it is, just ignore it, okay? But some of the stuff that you showed was like pre-pandemic. And I'm curious if your approach at all has changed, either online or even in person. Like, I don't know, to me, it just seems that there's just, being a teenager is just tough regardless. But like now, it just seems like so much. So is there something that you do or that you think about now with SEL?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, if others have thoughts, please do share. With both teams and with my college students, honestly, I've realized that it takes a lot more time to get through anything, right? So those moments of pause and processing become even sort of more vital to any process. And like leaning into that, right? Letting there be the space for that to happen. In particular with teams, right? Especially because devising it's about process, right? The focus is on the process. So we have the time to stop and pause and check in. I did a project, so the focus of my dissertation, I didn't say that, Jonathan sort of alluded to it, but I just graduated from the educational theater program at NYU Steinhardt within ETD. And the focus of that was a project called Rewriting the Declaration, where with a group of adults, we went through this journey, this devising journey of rewriting the Declaration. And it was a participatory Zoom play, right? And so I had cast in New York and cast in Chicago collaborating in the middle of the 2020 election, right? So there's pandemic, there's election, there is people sort of dying, right? And a lot of loss. And so I think I've learned a lot in that process that has sort of carried on into my educational work, right? About, yeah, creating the space for us to be sort of what we need to be at any given moment, right? And how do students need to show up that day, right? Do they need to show up with their cameras off? That's okay. But as long as, right, how do we communicate about that, right? How can we name, this is the thing that I need, right? So in that check-in, offering space for folks to name, what are my access needs today? Or what are my, like, where am I emotionally today, right? Being really intentional about that and creating that as a space so that then, you know, when people need to take, when they need to use that, they feel empowered to. Yeah, I'd love if others have sort of thoughts on that.
I've noticed a difference between pre-pandemic and now, that the kids, I guess, because of the long time of isolation, that they are not necessarily as comfortable with the physical proximity that they used to be. They have much stronger, clearer physical boundaries. And that was something really that I had to change the way I approached things, because some of the training exercises that I used to use no longer work. And it's kind of like what you said, you just kind of have to meet them where they are and do things differently, and finding ways to explore what used to be a certain kind of physical expression, and what does that look like now if I'm only comfortable with forearm to forearm versus draping and rolling. And because I've just noticed last year in this so far, it's just been a marked difference in that.
Yeah, and the students, you know, they've come to me with tools for that, right? So using a sort of a red, yellow, green system to identify where they're at with touch that day, which, you know, because I think this work is becoming more prevalent, right, across all of their learning spaces. They are being equipped with the tools, right? So again, I think that's part of the SEL work, is how do we together identify what do we need? What am I feeling in this moment? What do I need to be able to contribute to this classroom space? And to myself personally, right? And so then we can sort of share those tools and those skills together. Other responses to that, or other questions sort of about what I shared, or other things about my practice?
I have another question when we're ready to go there. So I'll just throw it out there. So I love how beautifully your lesson plan lays out what you're doing and how, and it's very clear how it's connected to SEL stuff. I'm curious, in the actual practice and implementation of this, how, I guess, explicit or transparent are you that this like in either reflection or before doing an exercise, this exercise is meant to work on like this competency, like this is why we're doing this. Like in your experience, like I'm not sure if it changes with I work a lot with young people, like elementary schoolers, so I personally I feel like maybe there's a difference when you're working with different ages, but also I don't know, I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit in your experience, and the benefits of being upfront about what we're doing when we're doing it and why, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great segue, actually. That was a question that I had for you all, right? Because in preparing for this, again, I am not an SEL expert, and so I don't actually have that practice, right, of naming that. And now I'm like, okay, how do I do this moving forward, right? Because I think it is useful. So now that I've recognized, right, that I'm using these core competencies, how do I invite students into that process? I think the examples that come to what I do intentionally, right, or have done, right, is the piece about responsible decision making, and inviting students into that, in particular in that transfer of ownership, right? So when I'm very explicit to say, this is your process, right? You get to determine what it's going to look like at the end. You're going to determine how do we get there, right? And so we do a Z to A sort of workshop, right? And then they go in with their sticky notes and paste on like, okay, we're going to rehearse on this day, and we're going to make sure that we have costumes on this day, right? And so like they are doing that production management, right? And so we are talking about explicitly self-management there, and like for decision making, we do a workshop on like actually how do you make decisions as a group, right? Do you vote? Do you use a matrix like consensus? Do you use me as the last resort? So we do talk about that part pretty explicitly. And in my experience, it works. And right, like I still am there and present, am helping to remind them, well, this is what you said you do today, and making sure that they have on our chart, right, that we make, there's a space for reflection on there, right? Like, did we get to do the thing that we said we would do today? If not, and so sometimes when they don't, there's frustration, right? And we can sort of talk about that, and then we sort of manage. So we talk about, okay, well now how do we pivot, right? And so that I am pretty upfront about. And at least with teens and college students, they can respond and be engaged in that conversation. But I am curious for all of us, right, to talk about what does it look like to name these competencies explicitly with our students, and what is that response? Do they sort of are they along for that journey? Are they so I'm going to put that back out to the group.
I'll say yes. I think Bethany, you work with young kids. Yeah, I work with teenagers, and we're very transparent about it. They're very familiar with the castle wheel and the interactivity of it. And I found it works if you ask them after a segment or an activity or a class and say, where on the competency wheel did we hit home today, or where were we missing? Or you can simply say, what did we do today that really targeted responsible decision making? And for little ones, I think you could just rephrase it, in terms of a vocabulary that they understand. And if you put it on them, like, what did we do today that worked, that encouraged y'all to work together, for relationship building skill or something? I think it is important to be transparent with them, because it helps them take ownership of their learning. And I think they are able to make a deeper connection for themselves. That's just been my experience.
Yeah, others have responses or like ways that you've been challenged, right, in that work.
Sorry, I don't know why I just typed that. I could have just, but my answer, so I have not actually really thought about this in theater per se, but I used to be an elementary school teacher. And so I would teach SEL programs, or Girls on the Run, for example, has got a really robust SEL program along with it. And I just don't, in my opinion, I think many young people, this is just part of how they grow up now in their schools. This is familiar vocabulary for them. So I think I'm trying to think of like, what is there something like that would not be good about sharing this with them? I don't think so. I think the more knowledge they have, the better. And I think we could be potentially really surprised, especially if we didn't grow up learning these things ourselves in school, like how familiar and just easy it is for them to talk about it.
I wonder, Quenna, if you might talk a little bit. I don't know if this is really part of your practice, but I would gather, certainly that you're engaging the young people, not just with this language, but with these concepts and ideals. If you, like, either for the organizations that you're working with, if there is ever a need to be sort of tracking students' development in these specific areas or competencies, and how you're going about doing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. For the curriculum that I worked on, I think there's a dream to sort of track students' development. So because that is, it's kind of, they're working with different school partners and different organizations to implement it. So it has a wide reach and scope. But the challenge is, okay, well then how do you sort of track that right across such a wide scope? And so one of the pieces that we built into it was for actually students to create an artistic response based on sort of their process and sort of what that journey was like doing the curriculum for them, and then to share that back with the organization. So that's one way that they are tracking that, right? They were really interested in the sort of esoteric, informal sort of way to track the experience for the students. In the organizations that I have worked for, because most of our reporting is based on grant funding and sort of like what foundations are looking for, I have yet to encounter explicitly where they're asking for this tracking. And so I think that's a really interesting question, like why not, right? Like if this is what's happening in the education world, right? Sort of where do the sort of feeder funders meet that, or the nonprofit funders meet that? I think in certain ways we track 21st century skills, I think is language that they're still using, right? Collaboration. And so in some ways there are overlaps, but I don't think I've been asked explicitly, how are we tracking SEL outcomes? Because I'm not working in a school also, right? So I'm usually working at organizations where students are coming to us. They're electing to be there, right? It's not a drama classroom, or we don't really do the residency model at the Goodman. Students come to us. Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. Yeah, other questions? I was curious if anybody did face a particular, like, are there challenges that you face trying to integrate SEL across your theater work, right? Whether that's traditional theater or as a deviser, I'm curious to see if we might be able to share resources there if there are challenges that we're finding in our respective work.
So I'll share something. So this all makes me think of the in theatrical intimacy education in that practice, like the self-advocacy techniques that are throughout that practice. I feel like that's what keeps popping in my head, because I feel like theater just marries this concept of social emotional learning in it because of the storytelling and the relationships and all that stuff. So I'm just wanted to share that I'm finding some cool connections.
I think this may be connected, Bethany. I'm not sure. One of the things that, I work mostly with college students in my daily life. I'm in schools a lot. But one of the things I'm noticing about my college students is in terms of their understanding about self-management, they're pretty good at it in some ways. And occasionally they're, how would I say this? Like they bring it into the rehearsal process in a way that for me is quite different. Like they might offer something that I think my first reaction is, oh, that's impeding our process, right? Like you just stepped into the middle of the creative process and you stopped it because you're saying you need this thing, which is not really about all of us. And you're offering it at a moment in the process where I'm not sure it's helping us move forward. Like it's kind of like that. And so I don't know, that's what I will offer. I will say for me, it's a bit of a challenge because my first reaction as the way I have been trained and as a person is to go, like that's my inner dialogue. And then I try to like not bring that in, to like give them to pause and listen and respond. But I do feel that sometimes, not often, but every once in a while.
Yeah, what you're both speaking to reminds me of this summer I assisted directed a production of Dreamgirls at a theater just outside of Chicago with adult actors. And many of them, I think, had graduated their undergraduate programs just before the pandemic, right? And so this was kind of their first professional production, production period since 2020. And all Black cast, Black creative team, white institution. So there were tensions, I think, for lots of reasons. And right, it's still COVID, right? So cast members are still getting COVID. And the ways in which they sort of self-advocated, I had not experienced from theater humans ever, right? Like whether at the school level, whether at the professional level. And so, right, I think we're right, that this SEL is how sort of people are being trained, right? It's just part of their vocabulary. And also I was like, this production costs millions of dollars. What are we doing when we pause? And so I had this internal sort of tension and conflict of like, okay, how do I support these young professionals, these young Black professionals, right, in this institution that has a lot of thank you, a lot of sort of power and money, right, and resources, and yeah, I think that is one of the tensions that we will continue to see, right, especially like in the wake of we see white American theater, right? Like I think all of these tensions will continue to sort of come to the forefront, right? Like, yes, we want actors, we want students to be advocating for what they need, and then also like, what is our responsibility, or how do we respond as the folks sort of in leadership, right? And sort of how do we make sure the thing goes on, or does it have to, is a question I find myself asking, right? Sort of like, at what point do we actually, like, is it okay to pause, and this is actually like a question I ask internally at the Goodman often, like, do we have to be producing so much, right? And so I think that part of what we will see is an outcome of infusing our rehearsals, right, with SEL, is that like folks are better equipped to notice when they're dysregulated, and to be able to say why, right? So yeah, I'm just sort of adding to that discussion if other folks have thoughts on like how do you navigate those particular tensions, right? When like the SEL is working and also like process, right? How do we keep moving forward in the process? And I might also return to Jonathan's question. I don't know if folks sort of shared how they might also be documenting or tracking SEL development and outcomes, particularly in theater programs. What does that look like for you?
I guess one way to track, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Lisa.
I've talked enough. I mean, you know, go ahead.
I think one way it could be tracked is just really simply through student surveys, Google Forms. The end, Google Forms, surveys, talking to them, informal data through discussions. But if, I know institutions need, like my school needs data. So that is one way that is an acceptable tracking method, is to maybe monthly or quarterly track certain SEL components and just directly asking them how, phrasing the questions like how connected do you feel to your cohort, or how do you feel you have improved or not in terms of self-management and things like that.
Just going to add that I don't think I'm ever, as a teaching artist at this point, ever with a group of people long enough for that any tracking to be useful, besides just offering space for like drama journals and people to just write or to like talk to each other like that I just don't know if that's long enough period of time to really think about growth and like tracking it in really specific ways. I know that there are programs that like have ensemble artists there for like their whole high school career, for example. And so that could be neat to see over a longer period of time.
Sorry, I was going to say, I also think there's merit in looking at very small scale, because, as teaching artists, we are stepping into spaces for X amount of time, and just kind of doing like if you have like a 6-hour session, like a check-in at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, like write in one word that describes how you're feeling right now, just kind of recognizing that it's okay for us to have emotions that shift within this work. And then, but how can you move through that and use that? So I think even just like simple check-ins like we were talking about, I know that doesn't help like research, big research, but I feel like, personally as teaching artists, that might be a good way to start to feel like we can measure what we're trying to do.
And I think it could, right? So if, I go back to my own framework where I have space for notes, right? Am I documenting and tracking sort of what people have communicated as their experience after any given activity? Could I start to do that? Absolutely, right? And then over the course of that, whatever that residency is or that summer, right? Then have been able to sort of follow student growth or create a separate document for that is something I might think. And then also, because I am inviting a lot of different kinds of student reflection throughout, and also like through some of the artifacts that they create when we devise, right? I'm inviting them to journal, I'm inviting them to respond to certain prompts. I could then invite them also to reflect on, okay, well, this was the competency we were working on, you know, how are you feeling there? And then sort of keep that or make a record, right, of that. I think those are some ways that y'all's responses are making me think. There's also maybe one other way this I encountered in the pandemic via another teaching artist, which was to sort of reflect via memes at the end of our process, right? And invite the students to create memes about sort of what was that experience like for you, right? And so like, again, we could target the question specifically to competency, but these are just a couple from the program, the strike program that I did at the Goodman. I think the first session that we did it during the pandemic. So maybe it was the summer of 2020. Yeah, I think this is that one. So, you know, how do we sort of also turn to the tools that they are using, right, to invite that reflection? Cool. Well, I will pause there, and I want to say thank you all for participating in the discussion, right? That was the goal, for it to be that, right? And to hopefully sort of share some of our respective experiences and how we might support each other in this work, in this effort. Thank you all.
Quenna, thank you so much for this. This has been amazing. Are you willing to share out your email address in case people have questions, or
absolutely
wanna ping ideas off of you? While Quenna is doing that, again, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then it will loop back. So we have two wonderful things coming up. We have the TOIA Inclusion Roundtable, which is our final TIOS of the year, but we also have our Leaders of Color Institute. So if you know people of color, this is an institute built for people of color by people of color. And it's actually where Quenna and I got connected, and she's been my mentee, which honestly, it's just a mentor-mentee partnership, because we've learned so much. I've learned so much from her. So she was talking to me about SEL, and I'm like, yes, let us do this, please. And I want to thank you for being willing to come on this journey with me, Quenna. This has been really wonderful, and definitely a resource everybody needs. So thanks again. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll see you again, hopefully soon.
Thanks, everyone.